You never forget your first light novel. While I do say this in a video about a light novel that is very much not my first, there is some quality about Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai that reminds me of this fact. There's something nostalgic and almost dreamlike about the prose and the content within. Perhaps not nostalgic in the sense that it gives me the same feelings that my first few light novels in 2014 did, but nostalgic in the mood it captures, its setting, and its penchant for recounting every little detail about how its characters move throughout its locales. It's almost as if this entire novel is a passionate dream I've had before and simply forgotten until now, until I read the words on the novel's pages. You may find this description quite ironic if you have seen the majorly popular 2018 anime adaptation, seeing the direction this particular story goes. However, I never did end up seeing the anime. I do have access to it and intend to watch the entire thing, including the film, but I just don't watch anime based on light novels on principle as a light novel reader. I've said time and time again that anime adaptations of novels, whether they are light novels or more mainstream novels, tend to struggle with the adaptation process. It's far easier to put an already visual medium, such as manga, onto the small screen or big screen, but novels are decidedly not a visual medium. Works of prose fiction that lean heavily on internal monologue or small details within miscellaneous prose that typically get the axe in the adaptation process tend to just collapse as soon as they are presented on screen. Even for adaptations that get relatively close to the quality of its source material, the original almost always beats it out in one very important area or another. A novel adaptation as good as, or better than, the original only comes very, very rarely. I may be in my early 20s, but I won't live forever. I occasionally make exceptions, but only for series I actually want to see, and I only watch them after I have covered the novel material. It's the code I consume anime by, and while limiting it may be, I do get the pleasure of experiencing many of my favorite pieces of media in their prime form. Some may say that the popularity of the anime adaptation of Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai speaks directly to its quality as an adaptation, but claims like this are empty if you haven't read the light novel to compare the anime to, and when other anime that shattered into countless small fragments when adapted by less than competent staff have gone on to become insanely popular. After reading this light novel, I am inclined to believe something was likely lost. Again, my comment is rather empty too, as I have not watched the anime to actually compare the two side by side. However, seeing the insane amounts of detail put into the traveling within just this one book and the accompanying mood it exudes throughout, perhaps the most potent I have felt since my readings of the Chaos installments of the science adventure visual novel series, I am very skeptical that the anime accurately incorporated these very charming facets as well as they were incorporated in the novels. These highly specific things aren't often translated well into film or animation. Perhaps the anime is a stellar once every 5 years quality adaptation despite its paltry episode count compared to the wealth of content it supposedly covered, aka the first 5 novels with the film covering the 6th and 7th. I can't say for sure because I haven't seen it. I can say, though, that even though I am skeptical, I am interested in seeing it someday. I do have the anime on standby for a reason. Nevertheless, this novel was my first experience with the series. All of the material within this book, aside from the popular opinion of the series based on its anime, was entirely new to me. Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai is the first novel of currently 10 in the Seishun Butayaro or Aobuta series. Released in April of 2014 originally, it finally released in late April 2020 in English. though many who ordered physical editions didn't get them until later due to shipping delays, not just countrywide or continent-wide, but worldwide. I received my copy here on May the 15th, which also happened to be the final day of my sophomore year of university. After being let down the day before, I waited patiently for the package to arrive. I periodically checked the front door to see if the package had come. When I got my hands on it, I tore that thing open and, lo and behold, the box had virtually an entire month's worth of books in it. I began systematically opening each of the 4 brown paper-wrapped stacks that had been packed together in the Right Stuff box. I had to know what the spine of the book looked like. You see, there is one rather big accessibility issue concerning this series that I was hoping to see solved in this release. In all pictures posted as previews on Yen Press's Twitter, the spine was completely out of view. The thing about this series is that Bunny Girl Senpai has much in common with Monogatari series and Kokoro Connect, and of all the similarities that Bunny Girl Senpai also had to have, its series volumes are best read in order of release, but the covers have absolutely no volume numbers on them. Essentially, this is a novel series that refuses to tell the readers what order to read it in. While this dilemma could be solved immediately with a simple web search, having to search up the order of the novels will immediately kill interest in some readers that would otherwise have read and loved these books. And having the novel reading order online may not always work. To this day, 11 years later, people are still confused as to what the order of Monogatari series is, despite there being an easy release order to follow. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think the author would release the original books in an order that doesn't make sense. Japanese book order is the way to go. Done. In the Japanese versions of Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, the spines are also unnumbered, but later releases around the time of the anime included new dust jackets and obi that, on the spine, finally included volume numbers. And I know this because I just happen to have a complete Japanese collection of this series thus far. If you're thinking, why did you bother buying the entirety of a series you didn't know you'd like in its original language when you knew you'd also buy it in English, isn't that a bit of an impulse purchase? Then I'd comment that you are better at spending money than I, and I would retort a hearty yes to the question posed. But more importantly, we've got different kinds of dust jackets, ones that are themed with art relating to the anime, and ones that are new illustrations by Keiji Mizoguchi, the series illustrator. And even the new volume that was released after these dust jackets were a big thing included a series number in the very same style on its obi. Needless to say, the Japanese side saw the problem and put in a fix. But did that mean that Yen Press would take a similar route? As I pulled out the book, one glance at the spine revealed the answer. Yes. It's not in the same style as the Japanese numbering, but at least we have it on the basic cover. Though it's not like we get new dust jackets for normal editions of books over here in the West. Japan's just cool like that. But that did mean that Yen Press had to address the issue in its very first release. In terms of new dust jackets in Japan, Dengeki has also done this with the new 10th anniversary Sword Art Online books, even though the series is closer to 20 if we count its life as a web novel. But being able to pick your own cover is great. You can even take both covers off for a cursed secret flavor, capitalist grunge. Each label has its own basic cover, but Dengeki books have this weird concrete popcorn ceiling design going on, and unlike the additional dust jackets, many Japanese books are formatted with dust jackets over some basic design. But this is neither here nor there. Aside from the spine, I'd like to review the physical book itself before diving into the story contained within, and since I have the Japanese version too, I'll show them both off for comparison. The English yen-on edition of Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai is simple yen-on format. It's a paperback with a gloss finish, and it's all the better for it. While publishers tried to throw big, extravagant editions for bigger series or series that were tankobon format in Japan, these editions tend to end up being more difficult to hold and more uncomfortable to read, not to mention more expensive. I love the Isolator, and I love seeing it on my shelf, but as someone who owns the Bunkobon of Zettai Naru Isolator 1, I can't help but sigh at the English release. I'm not a fan of hardcovers. I liked them when I was a child, but I was a child and didn't read. Paperbacks feel much better in my hands, and I greatly prefer them. Yen Press typically puts out two types of paperbacks, gloss finish and matte finish. Matte finish is reserved for only a few series, Log Horizon, Sword Oratoria, Saga of Tanya the Evil, That Time I Was Reincarnated as a Slime, and others. At first I thought that this release may be matte finish, which I do like, and I feel as though it would have fit the series. I was proven wrong though, but I am still absolutely grateful that it isn't a hardcover. It feels pretty good to hold, and easy to read as a result. The way the Japanese cover was adapted for the English version also was very nice. I had no clue how it would look before I saw it previewed when Yen Press tweeted out the cover, and I have to say that it looks good. The difference in dimensions between the Japanese and English versions also causes no issues. The color pages and black and white inserts are blown up to fit the page dimensions, and it looks really good. The spine and back cover are always interesting in English releases. Most of the time, Japanese releases of light novels will have a spine and back cover that are just a template that all books by that publisher follow. English light novels don't do that, and they look so much better for it. The blue spine with the circle cut out of Mai is very visually appealing, and I can't wait to have a full lineup of the whole series on my bookshelf. The back is also really good. The back covers for Dengeki Bunko releases allow an image on the back. Yen Press has always been thorough in keeping those images in their releases, but adding more spice when applicable. Sword Art Online and Excel World are still very, very standard in English. However, the addition of these new splotches reminiscent to the one on the front brings the whole thing together and is much more engaging than just the image of Mai in the bunny suit. Even though I much prefer books with smaller dimensions, the appeal of the English cover of this entry is off the charts. Going inside the book, the page count is roughly 220 or so. This is around average for a light novel in English, seeing as how the Japanese release is about 350, ever so slightly above average from my estimates. This means that the page count is just slightly lower in English than I expected. Of course, everything from the Japanese version is there in the English version, but sometimes certain writers have a way of writing that tends to come out longer in English. Take Tape Nagatsuki as an example. His average length ReZero installments inflate into rather large English releases, especially the recent entries. Hajime Kamoshida seems to not be such a writer, or at the very least, the translator and editor make his writing succinct. The final thing about the physical book I want to talk about is how the chapter pages were adapted. I was afraid that the chapter pages would be changed from what they were in the Japanese version. The pages are very simple, but aesthetically pleasing. Seven Seas is known to essentially reformat their books from square one, which does result in some nice design like that of Classroom of the Elite, but Yen Press isn't known to do this, and I'm very glad. The chapter title pages were adapted as they should have been, and that makes me very happy. Before even the first chapter card, we get a little prelude. People who have yet to experience the story through the anime may find themselves wondering if this small excerpt of text holds any significance, and I'd say that it does, but it holds more meaning after you know what happens in the book. We begin the story proper. Sakuta Azusagawa lives with his little sister Kaede. She appears to not leave the house ever, and they appear to not have their parents living with them. As Sakuta goes to the library to check out a book for Kaede, he notices a girl dressed in a bunny suit casually hanging out in front of everyone, but it seems as though nobody can see her except Sakuta. Soon after, Sakuta makes contact with the girl, famous actress Mai Sakurajima. He's encountered this sort of phenomenon before, and he has proof. What is the strange affliction that has befallen Mai Sakurajima? How can it be cured, and can it be cured in the first place? This review is spoiler-free, so I'll keep everything pretty vague. I enjoy Sakuta as a protagonist. People love to complain about light novel protagonists nowadays and treat Sakuta and similar cases as miracles, but I think that's a bit much. Still, I think Sakuta is a great protagonist, and it's not because of the same shallow reasons that others cite, but because he's a pretty balanced person, but he's still a loner. Sakuta understands more than his peers, but he isn't a genius. His intelligence is more like that of a college student, and it's well warranted given his situation. Despite this slight edge over his peers, he still is a bit hard-headed and is a natural loner with few friends. He jokes maybe just a bit too much, as can be seen in a few of his interactions with Mai, especially in the first 3 chapters. He's very critical of social atmosphere and refuses to use cell phones. He isn't exactly wrong, as can be seen in chapter 5, but it's still a bit of an Achilles heel, and to an extent, not even he can completely evade the atmosphere he is so critical of. As for Mai Sakurajima, I liked her a lot more than I expected, and that is probably because I expected her to be more tsundere, and I can't stand that archetype, but she comes off more as someone who isn't afraid to show that she can get irritated occasionally. She's also very playful and shows that she can be reasoned with even when angry, and she legitimately does care about other people once she's gotten to know them. The chemistry between Sakuta and Mai is so great and is probably one of the best parts of the novel. I may not go as far as to say that they are electric, but there are definitely some sparks flying by the end of the second act. The final act is fantastic, and I love how it ties together the mystery, the themes, and the relationship between Sakuta and Mai very nicely. The book was destined to be good since there is a mention of Schrodinger's cat. Speaking of Schrodinger's cat, Ryo Futaba is a character I like very much. I like how angry and lonely and self-absorbed she is. Kinda reminds me of another character from another light novel I really like. I'm looking forward to more of her. I also like Sakuta's other friend, but as of now, he's just kind of there as a background character. I talked earlier about the dreamy feel of the novel as well as the travels and the long descriptions of them. I'm not sure why, but I feel as though they made the novel for me. I greatly enjoyed when Sakuta and Mai visited another city. That was a standout of the novel for me. I couldn't help but imagine picturesque scenes of travel by train and cities at night. I'm pretty well acquainted with both in real life, even though the railways in the US are quite different to the ones in Japan, to say the very least. I was captivated by these sections, and I'm hungry for more. They were written so wonderfully, they scratch an itch I didn't know I had. The translation was handled by Andrew Cunningham, a name many of you will recognize for his work on the Boogie Pop novels. As a translator who has been around light novels since before the bubble burst in 2008 and recently came back to translate full-time in the past few years, he has some experience under his belt. When I get something translated by Andrew Cunningham, there is a high chance that it's some good stuff, and this falls into that category despite the inherent hurdles that come with this title. It's no secret that I'm not a fan of how the titles in this series are translated. It's the job of a translator to bring works from one language into another while being as accessible and coherent as possible in the target language, while also giving the reader the closest possible experience to the original Japanese version despite cultural barriers and language barriers. This process inherently requires changing a couple words because of context reasons or changing a joke so that it actually makes sense in the target language. I know some anime fans get really worked up when they hear the big bad localization word, but direct translations do not give you the same experience as a native level Japanese reader. Everything is at least somewhat localized if it is translated. Language is a construct. There is no such thing as a word in one language that means the exact same thing in another language with the same context and intricacies and all that jazz. But with a little localization and creativity, translators can get really accurate even if uninformed fans think it's inaccurate on a surface level because it doesn't sound Japanese, because it's actually in real good English, which is the point. What I'm leading to here is that Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai isn't a good English title. It sounds stilted, still has a Japanese word in it, and arguably picks a bad term for the literal first word in its title, but people still accept it just because it sounds Japanese, because it's bad English. It's a clear, localized title was forced by the Japanese side situation, and the anime was already out. There wasn't much that could be done. Rascal is, just in my opinion, not a suitable translation for Seishun Buta Yaro, just in terms of how intense it is of a jab to the main character. It is too soft. I can understand leaving out the Seishun Buta part because it isn't entirely necessary, and any which way you spin that into English, people don't pile on descriptors like that, especially in a book title. However, Yarrow is closer to jackass, bastard, or if you want to be very loose, fuckface. Somewhat close to those in intensity. Something you might jokingly call your friend when they're acting up. Rascal is... I haven't heard that word since I was about 7, and that's because it's mostly used by adults towards small children, and I am not a small child. It's not the best choice there. Also, Senpai is Japanese, and it's not like Naruto where it's a person's name, it is someone's title. I know that even within good translators, the idea of honorifics in English translation is just a bit of discourse that has been going on for decades and will likely never end. There are good translators who insist on honorifics being kept in always. There are also good translators who insist that honorifics should be kept out of translations when applicable, and companies have their own policies regarding honorifics. Yen-on novels tend to not use honorifics except in the case of bottom-tier character Tomozaki. I personally don't 100% lean towards one camp or another, but I feel like this is a bit different because it's in the title. The audience is clearly expected to know what a senpai is, but the general English public either doesn't know or just has a vague idea from Notice Me Senpai memes. I don't have a perfect solution for what I think should have been done, but if I was handling the title, I would have just excluded the senpai bit. The same thought with the upcoming Volume 2, Petite Devil Kohai, and its use of honorifics in that title. Whether or not Andrew Cunningham agrees with my sentiments hardly matters, though. I'm just illustrating the circumstances of the work he was presented with. What does matter is his way of alerting the readers as to the meaning of senpai as early as possible. There are other instances where Cunningham couldn't help but use a Japanese term and then immediately defines it for the audience, and the best part of it is that it works every time and is smooth. I'm sure I noticed because I look for these things as a translation and localization enthusiast, but if you wanted to recommend the novel to a friend who knows next to nothing about Japanese customs, they would understand this without some big list of translator notes, and that's a big plus. What's also of note is the translation of the Hosho homonym problem. Cunningham is the translator, but I'm not exactly sure who to give credit to for this one, because there are some fantastic editors out there, and this might have been the editor's suggestion, but this was a really nice touch nonetheless. Rather than a direct translation that an English language reader wouldn't entirely understand, the homonym problem is brought to realization in the English version with the two Hoshos translated as assure and ensure, similar sounding words with related meanings in English and both accurate translations of Hosho at the same time. I had to dive into the Japanese version to see a comparison of the problems in English compared to their Japanese. Because I'm not entirely practiced enough in the language, I actually had some issues during the process, but after enough sleuthing in addition to my basic knowledge, I was pretty impressed with what was put on the pages of the English version. Problems in other languages are difficult for readers to wrap their heads around, so wording everything precisely as it was in the final product is very helpful for accessibility and comprehension. Overall, the translation quality on this release is high. Yen Press's release of the Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai light novel is possibly one of the best releases of any light novel they have put out thus far. When it was announced during summer 2019, the response it garnered was wild, and I can now see why. With a top-notch translation and dreamy prose, this flirty light novel should be on everyone's shelves. Here's to hoping that good sales perhaps lead to interest in Hajime Kamoshida's past titles. If it happened for Kisetsu Morita, then it may not entirely be out of the question. Despite how improbable it is, the chances are not zero, and if I could lay my hands on an English copy of The Pet Girl of Sakuraso someday, I think that'd be pretty swell. And you know what else is swell? The digital-only light novel series Kokoro Connect. If you like Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, then you'll love this series. Predating Bunny Girl Senpai by a couple years, Kokoro Connect is another member of the teenagers getting afflicted by supernatural phenomena, and in order to save themselves they have to improve as people and face their insecurities genre. If you want another take on the kind of story you heard me talk about, check it out. Because it's digital only, you'll get volumes for cheaper than if they were physical. And if digital turns you off, then go on to Seven Seas Entertainment's website, take their monthly survey, and ask them to partner with J Novel Club to produce physical copies. It's a great series that also has a great translation, and it's super unappreciated. I shoehorn this kind of advertisement at the end of all of my videos, but it really does fit this one in particular because they're so similar. If you are even slightly interested, please check out my other video reviews on the first 2 or 3 volumes so far. They don't look as good as this video, but they're about good books nonetheless.